Welcome back to the Fast Times News YouTube channel for another deep dive. We're your hosts from the Fast Times News team. And today, we are diving into some seriously consequential news. President Biden just greenlit Ukraine's use of American-made Atacms missiles. And those could hit targets way inside Russia. We've got a stack of articles from sources like Reuters, the AP, and the New York Times to help us understand what this shift in U.S. policy really means.
What's fascinating here is that for months, Ukrainian President Zelensky has been pleading for these weapons. He's argued that they're absolutely game-changing. And now, just as Russia escalates attacks on Ukraine's power grid, and North Korea enters the conflict on Russia's side, Biden gives the, talk about a high-stakes poker game.
Yeah, it's a move that could have serious ripple effects. But before we get into all that, let's make sure everyone's on the same page. What exactly are these Atacms, and why does Ukraine think they're so crucial?
Atacms stands for Army Tactical Missile System. These are long-range, precision-guided missiles. Think of them as a supercharged version of the HIMARS systems Ukraine has been using to great effect. HIMARS, or high-mobility artillery rocket systems, have been instrumental in Ukraine's defense, but their range is limited. Atacms can hit targets up to 190 miles away, meaning Ukraine can, for the first time, strike deep into Russian territory.
So we're not just talking about pushing back the front lines. With this kind of range, Ukraine could potentially cripple Russia's entire war effort by taking out their logistical hubs, command centers, maybe even air bases, far from the current fighting.
Exactly. That's the strategic value. Disrupt the supply lines, disrupt the command structure. And suddenly, Russia's ability to wage this war is significantly weakened.
Okay, so that explains why Ukraine's been so eager to get their hands on these things. But the Biden administration has been hesitant for a long time. Why drag their feet if Atacms could potentially turn the tide of the war?
The White House has had some very real concerns about the potential for escalation. Giving Ukraine the capability to strike deep within Russia is a big deal. It raises the question, will Putin see this as crossing a red line, leading him to retaliate in even more unpredictable and dangerous ways? Some even worry about attacks on NATO territory.
While the potential for escalation is a real concern, some experts also argue that this decision might be too little, too late. Ukraine has already been developing its own long-range drones, which are much cheaper than Atacms. And there's no guarantee that the U.S. will provide enough missiles to make a decisive difference. So is Biden's hesitation just kicking the can down the road?
That's a valid point. It's definitely a complex situation with no easy answers. But in terms of what might have tipped the scales for Biden, I think there were two major factors at play.
Okay, lay them on us. What pushed Biden to take this risk?
First, the recent Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy grid. These attacks caused massive blackouts, leaving millions of Ukrainians without power as winter sets in. It was a brutal escalation by Moscow, aiming to break the will of the Ukrainian people. Second, the deployment of North Korean troops to fight alongside the Russians.
That was a pretty shocking development. I mean, not only does it signal a deepening of Russia's alliance with North Korea, but it also potentially changes the whole equation for the U.S. This isn't just about containing Russia in Europe anymore.
It suggests that this conflict is becoming part of a broader global power struggle. Russia involving North Korea was a deliberate move, a signal that they are not isolated, and have allies willing to stand with them, even in the face of international condemnation. And for the U.S., it adds a new dimension to the conflict, one that touches on American interests in the Indo-Pacific region.
So it seems like Biden's decision was a calculated response to these escalations. On the one hand, he's saying, there are consequences for your actions, Putin. But on the other hand, he's taking a big gamble. And to make things even more unpredictable, we've got President-elect Trump waiting in the wings. He's been pretty critical of U.S. aid to Ukraine.
He has.
Hasn't he?
And that raises a critical question. Will Trump continue sending these advanced weapons, or will he try to broker a peace deal, potentially one that favors Russia? Trump's past statements suggest he sees the conflict in Ukraine as more of a European problem than an American one.
This raises a fascinating question. What does this decision tell us about Putin's strategy? Is he doubling down on a failing war? Or is this a sign of desperation? We'll dig deeper into that and explore the potential fallout of this move right after them.
It's hard to say for certain what Putin's endgame is. His recent actions, especially the attacks on civilian infrastructure and the North Korean troop deployment, seem to indicate a willingness to escalate the conflict. But it's a risky gamble.
It seems like those actions have backfired, at least when it comes to Western resolve. Supplying Atacms is a pretty clear message that Putin's tactics aren't deterring support for Ukraine.
You're right. And we have to consider the state of the Russian military. They've already suffered significant losses, and their equipment and tactics have been exposed as outdated and ineffective in many instances.
And now, with winter setting in and the energy grid crippled, Ukraine faces a whole new set of challenges.
Absolutely. The humanitarian situation is likely to worsen quickly, and that could put immense pressure on Zelensky to negotiate, even if it means making painful concessions.
But on the other hand, Biden's decision to send Atacms could give Ukraine a much-needed boost, both militarily and psychologically. It demonstrates that the U.S. remains committed to supporting their fight.
That's true, and it sends a clear signal to Russia that there are limits to what the West will tolerate. The big question is, will it be enough to shift the balance on the battlefield?
Right, because ultimately, the outcome of this war will be determined by what happens on the ground. And right now, things aren't looking great for Ukraine.
No, they're not. Russia is making advances in the east, and they've been relentlessly targeting Ukraine's infrastructure. ACMS could disrupt these efforts, but it's unlikely to be a magic bullet.
And we can't ignore the political dimension of all of this. The U.S. presidential election has injected a huge amount of uncertainty into the equation, with Trump back in the White House.
Yeah.
It's anyone's guess what kind of support Ukraine can expect.
That's the wild card here. Trump has consistently expressed sympathy for Putin and has stated that he views the conflict in Ukraine as a European problem, not an American one. It's conceivable that he might cut a deal with Russia that leaves Ukraine in a very vulnerable position.
That's a chilling thought for Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. They've been fighting for their survival for months, and now they're facing the prospect of being abandoned by their most powerful ally.
It's a real possibility, and one that Zelensky is keenly aware of. He's been trying to shore up support from other Western leaders, but it's unclear how much they'll be willing to do without the full backing of the United States.
So where does this leave us? What's the most likely scenario going forward?
Honestly, it's impossible to say with any certainty. There are so many factors at play, and the situation is constantly evolving, but I think it's safe to say that the next few months will be absolutely critical for Ukraine.
Do you think this is a make-or-break moment for them?
In a sense, yes. If they can't achieve significant battlefield successes and secure stronger commitments from the West, their chances of surviving as an independent nation will diminish considerably, and that would be a tragic outcome that none of us want to see.
It's a sobering thought,
Yeah.
and really underscores the gravity of this situation. We're talking about the fate of an entire nation. And the ripple effects of this conflict are already being felt worldwide.
And those ripple effects are only going to intensify in the coming months, especially with the uncertainty surrounding the U.S. presidential election and the growing involvement of actors like North Korea.
It's an incredibly complex web of interconnected events. But amidst all this chaos and uncertainty, is there any hope for a peaceful resolution? Or are we on a path toward a wider, more devastating conflict?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. What I can say is that the road to peace is going to be long and difficult, and it will require a willingness from all sides to compromise and make incredibly tough decisions.
And right now, that willingness seems to be in short supply.
Indeed. But we can always hold on to the hope that cooler heads will prevail, and that a solution can be found that preserves Ukraine's sovereignty and prevents further bloodshed.
I think we can all agree on that. But in the meantime, the fighting continues, and the stakes are higher than ever. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our viewers with some food for thought. Given everything we've discussed, what do you think the future holds for Ukraine? And what role should the international community play in seeking a resolution to this conflict?
Those are crucial questions, and ones that deserve deep consideration. As you reflect on them, remember that every action, every decision made by the players involved, has the potential to tip the scales. The future of Ukraine, and perhaps even the world, hangs in the balance.
It's a terrifying thought that the fate of an entire nation could hinge on the decisions of a few powerful individuals.
And the international community is going to have to tread very carefully. They need to provide meaningful support to Ukraine, while also avoiding actions that could provoke a wider conflict with Russia.
It's a delicate balancing act, for sure. History has shown us time and again that even the smallest miscalculation can have unintended consequences that quickly spiral out of control.
Exactly. The stakes are incredibly high, and the entire world is watching to see what happens next.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, unpacked a ton of information from our sources, and hopefully given our Fast Times News viewers plenty to think about.
We've gone deep on the tactical implications of Atacms, examined the strategic thinking behind Biden's decision, and explored the potential consequences for the war in Ukraine. and the global balance of power.
And we've really highlighted the very real dangers of escalation and the urgent need for diplomacy and dialogue to find a path to peace.
This story is far from over, and you can bet that the Fast Times News will continue to follow it closely.
So make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our in-depth analysis and breaking news updates.
And in the meantime, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Biden's decision to supply Atacms to Ukraine? Was it the right move? What do you think the future holds?
Let's keep this conversation going. Share your insights and perspectives down in the comments below.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay curious.